Hello and welcome to a Game Week 13 Premier League preview. Just before I start, can I just make sure everything is working as expected, and then we will get into the games. How's it going, guys? Everything working? Everything working all right? Perfect. Everything seems to be going well, so I will start off. Welcome to another live stream. Continuing on with Premier League action. We've got 5 games to cover in this stream. Last week we saw a lot of sort of unexpected results. Then we had a busy midweek of European action, so we're getting to the point of the season where things are a bit more difficult to predict. We're sort of at the stage where we have to expect the unexpected. We start to see a lot of rotation, changes in systems and strategies, managerial changes. So we can only really try to make the most of that uncertainty. But life does get a bit more difficult for betting at this stage of the season. I will be skipping out Friday Night Football from this stream, Brighton against Southampton. Reason being, I've got a thread planned to be released today, and it's a collab, so I am looking forward to that one. Make sure you're following me on Twitter if you're not already. Thank you all for tuning in live. I would like to invite and encourage all of you to leave your bets in the comment section. I'll be reading through them as the stream goes on, and I will be happily going through them as well. If you're watching this as a video, again, feel free to do the same, and I'll reply to you as soon as possible. So, first game to cover is Wolves against Bournemouth. It's a 3 o'clock kickoff at Molineux. The only non-televised game that I'll be covering on this slate. After a tough start to the season for Gary O'Neill, he sort of dragged his side out of the bottom 3 after winning at Craven Cottage last weekend. They now sit on a 4-game unbeaten streak, so they've recovered some form, and that includes back-to-back wins against Southampton and Fulham. Matheus Cunha was the standout performer in that game against Fulham, but Gary O'Neill was forced into quite a lot of changes, which made that result a bit of a shock one, which I will talk a bit more as this stream progresses. For Bournemouth, they could not complete the turnaround against a 10-man Brighton side last time out, as a late goal from David Brooks only proved to be a consolation. That made it back-to-back losses for the Cherries, who have dropped into 13, so they're in a bit of a sticky run of form at the moment. The injury report for both teams is a bit of an interesting one, which is really why I wanted to cover this game. I think there's an opportunity to be exploited. If we look into how Wolves lined up against Fulham, we can see there's only really one fit centre-back, and that's Totti Gomez, who has deputised at full-back. So it was a bit of a sticky situation for Gary O'Neill, who had to sort of go with a bit of a rogue lineup. And we might get something similar because not much has changed in terms of the injury report. A lot of the players remain sort of doubtful to start. So we could get quite a similar team this weekend against Bournemouth. So the sort of key changes were Mario Lemina at centre-back, Reinhard Nouri at centre-back, João Gomez and Andre in midfield as a partnership. And the sort of attacking constellation was generally unchanged, but it was more just how they adjusted their midfield and defence. Bournemouth also had a bit of a change in their 11. They had Ryan Christie out through suspension. But it was more the attacking quartet that was of focus. So we saw sort of similar lineup with Evan Nilsson, Marcus Tavernier, Semenyo and Justin Kluivert, but they were in sort of different positions than usual. So we saw Tavernier on the right, Semenyo on the left and Kluivert through the centre. Normally, we've sort of become accustomed to Semenyo playing on the right, Tavernier through the centre, and Kluivert on the left. So that was a bit unusual to see that. I'm not entirely sure why Iraola went for such a change, but having the sort of wingers on their more natural side, in the sense that Semenyo is obviously left-footed. He normally plays on the right. He played on the left. Same for Tavernier. Right footer played on the right. I think it sort of favoured more crossing as opposed to cutting in and shooting. That sort of change did affect Tavernier, who was much less involved. For Semenyo, though, he still had 5 shots and was like the focal point of the attack. So that's another change to sort of take note of going forward. Tyler Adams also started in that game, and I thought he played pretty well in midfield, coped well. But with Christie returning from suspension, we might sort of expect some changes for Bournemouth in this game. So the first angle for me is João Gomez to register a shot. Obviously, he got on the score sheet against Fulham in that 4-1 win. But notably, he sort of played in a much more advanced role than we've become accustomed to. So, as he normally plays alongside Lamina, or in a sort of trio alongside Andre and Lamina, he's more the defensive one. But against Fulham, we saw him get into quite good advanced positions, and in that game he had 4 shots. For context, his season high before this had been just 1, so he's only managed 1 shot as a maximum in any game across this season. But he scored now 2 goals in his last 3 games, so he finds himself in a bit of good scoring form. And I think that should sort of inspire him to shoot more. Now, his shot prices are pretty short. Bet365 are 1.4 for him to register a shot, which is obviously not ideal. But Unibet are top price at 1.65. I think if I was to tip an angle for him, it would be a shot on target price, which is priced at 19-5 with Bet365, so nearly 4-1. And given that it's landed in each of the three last games for João Gomez, if he is to play in a more advanced role, really like that. 4-1 looks a massive price. Quite fancy Cunha goal or assist. Yeah, I really like Cunha as well for this game. Was planning to talk about him in a second, but he finds himself in fantastic form as well. He is the talisman for Wolves, and I think he draws a good matchup at home against Bournemouth. So first angle for me would be João Gomez, probably leaning towards shot on target, with his shot prices looking quite short. Unibet top price at 4-1, which looks massive. Next angle is again to do with sort of team sheet changes, and obviously we saw Andre playing a sort of deeper role alongside João Gomez, and notably he played the full 90. Now, he hasn't really been a mainstay in the 11 under Gary O'Neill. Not entirely sure why. I thought he played well when he did get the start earlier in the season, but then he was dropped. But brought back into the 11, obviously, with the injuries. Playing the full 90 is notable. In that game, he drew 2 fouls, and I'm backing him to repeat that. He's currently priced at 1.8 to draw 2 more fouls with Paddy Power. And he's landed this selection in 3 out of 5 games this season. So he hasn't started regularly for Wolves, as I mentioned. He did have a few weeks off after sort of appearing regularly at the start of the season. But I think he's a really good player to target for fouls drawn for a few reasons. So if we look into the data, we can see he drew 2 fouls in his first game against Newcastle, then 4 against Villa. He drew 1 foul against Liverpool, but in that game he had, I think, 2 advantages played for fouls on him. So realistically, that should have been 3 fouls drawn at least. Then he drew just 1 foul against Brentford in 57 minutes, so obviously didn't play the full 90. But notably, Bournemouth actually ranked bottom in the league for total fouls committed. Then 0 fouls drawn against Man City, again, who ranked second bottom. They made just 4 fouls in that game. And Andre was hooked at half-time, so I'm kind of happy to ignore these 2 games based on the matchup, based on the fact that he had very limited minutes. and then obviously 2 fouls drawn, most recently against Fulham. So his data looks good. His misses you can very easily justify. I think a lack of minutes, a poor matchup. So I think 1.8 is a really, really nice price if he is to get sort of 90 minutes or thereabouts against the Bournemouth side, who actually ranked top in the league for most fouls. So they press strongly, they lead from the front, and I think it's an ideal matchup for Andre. So definitely ladder potential for this one. That's probably one of my favourite bets for this weekend. Now, I've got a couple other angles. Those two that I've mentioned are probably my favourite for this game. Now, the rest I'm going to mention are more just leans. First one was being Cunha's shots. I also really did like his goal or assist price. Again, being above evens, I think is really nice. I just think, yeah, he's a talisman for Wolves. He's been in fantastic form. One to target. Another player would be Semenyo shots. Now, as I said, he played on the left in his previous game, but he just sees so much attacking involvement. I would prefer him on the right because then sort of angles become favourable for him to cut in onto his favoured left foot. But he does the same thing when he plays on the left wing, pretty much identical. And the sort of whole attacking, everything really comes through Semenyo up front. What I will mention though is with Iraola shifting those two players, I think Evan Nilsson actually becomes a bit more of a target. Now, he is the shortest of the four, naturally, because he is the striker. But I just think his sort of attacking prospects increase with Semenyo on the left and Tavernier on the right. Again, though, I do think Christie comes into the lineup, so we might see either Tavernier drop out or Kluivert drop out in this game against Wolves. So, Semenyo is suspended. Okay, that's interesting, actually. I didn't see that. So what I would imagine happens is obviously Semenyo drops out, Kluivert on the left, Marcus Tavernier on the right, and Christie to the centre. I think makes sense. But as I said, Iraola has been sort of shifting around with his lineup, so it makes it a bit more difficult to call. That does present a bit of an opportunity, I would say, with Semenyo missing, given that he accounts for such a large proportion of the attacking output. I think naturally a lot more responsibility will fall on the shoulders of Tavernier, I think is a natural one to say. Kluivert too. So those two could be one to watch in this game. Potentially with a higher expected minutes as well, which is useful for both of them. But that is all the bets I've got covered for Wolves against Bournemouth. Next game is 5:30 kickoff on Saturday. It's West Ham against Arsenal. West Ham obviously beat Newcastle at St James's Park last game out. I thought that was quite a shock result. I don't think anyone was expecting that, but Newcastle were extremely timid in their approach, which is unexpected. But to win by 2 clear goals at a stadium like St James's Park is a real achievement, a real accomplishment, and I think they'll gain a lot of confidence from that. That was something that they really needed. That was their 4th victory of the season, and that lifts the Hammers to 14th, so they'll be looking to sort of use that to build some momentum going forward. For Arsenal, the international break came at an ideal time for them, and they've looked sort of rejuvenated since then. They put together 3-0 win against Forest, comfortable win against Forest, and then a 5-1 victory against Sporting. Now bear in mind, this Sporting side did just beat City at home, so to beat them 5-1 is, again, very, very good result for them. That sort of broke them out of a 3-game winless rut just before the break. And they now find themselves in 4th, tied on points with Chelsea and Brighton. So the 8 points of Liverpool, they've got work to do. But given that they look a more rejuvenated side, I think that's the right word to describe them so far, they'll be confident coming into this game. The injury report is an interesting one. We had Gabriel taken off late against Sporting with an injury, so he's doubtful for this clash. It will be Kyrgios to deputise for him. He joins a very short injury list of just Ben White and Tomiyasu, so I imagine we get quite a similar Arsenal side to that which beat Sporting. It's an equally small injury list for the Hammers, and actually quite a similar situation for them, as they had Todibo taken off with an apparent injury, a hamstring injury, I believe, at St James's Park. He was replaced by Mavropanos, who will likely retain his spot at the back. But otherwise, it's an we expect a sort of unchanged lineup for West Ham, as Kudus remains suspended. First angle for me for this game would be for Paqueta to make 2 or more tackles. He made 7 tackles against Newcastle, and I think watching that game, he was the standout performer from a sort of defensive perspective. That he put himself about, he was involved in everything went through him, and I was really, really impressed with how he played. This game in general, West Ham against Arsenal, isn't really a fantastic matchup to target in my opinion. I think West Ham have been quite inconsistent this season, quite difficult to bet on. But really like Paqueta, as I said. So in that game, there was no Guido Rodriguez and no Edson Alvarez. So Souček and Paqueta played in sort of a double pivot. And as I said, Paqueta was absolutely excellent. 7 tackles, and he often found himself sort of drawn towards the right wing to help deal with Anthony Gordon. So if we are to see him do something similar, that would see him get in duels with Bukayo Saka, who obviously sees a lot of the ball for Arsenal, linking up with Odegaard on that side. So I think if Paqueta is getting in duels with the likes of Odegaard and Saka, this line on the surface, 2 or more tackles against an Arsenal side who will dominate the ball, dominate possession, looks a bit low. Obviously that's before looking into any data, so Paqueta hasn't exactly been a fantastic target for tackles this season. He's averaging just 2.19 tackles per 90 in the league. If we exclude the Carabao Cup, 2.19 tackles in the league. And that actually drops significantly when playing at home. So you can see him averaging just 0.79 tackles per game at home. But this bet has landed in 2 out of 6, one of them being against Man City, who are arguably the most similar side to Arsenal in the league. But again, the focus for me is on the fact that he'll be playing in a sort of deeper role, finding duels with Saka and Odegaard, operating in that sort of zone of the field. And just generally, I think 2 tackles at 1.8 looks a bit high on the surface. So that's something to take advantage of, I would say. As I say, if we look into his last 3 games, he's made 7 tackles against Newcastle away, 4 tackles against Forest, blanked against Everton, but that's not as good a matchup or anywhere near as good a matchup as Arsenal. So if he can sort of avoid picking up a card, if West Ham decide to sit in, which I imagine they will, really, really like his tackle prospects, and I do see the potential to ladder. He's much shorter elsewhere on Sky as well, so I do like this price from 365. Second angle for me would be targeting a particular matchup, and it would be Bowen against Calafiori. So as I say, West Ham have been a bit inconsistent with betting this season, and they have not been a target whatsoever for sort of drawing fouls. Bowen actually ranks second, or if we exclude Guilherme, Bowen ranks second for the Hammers squad in terms of fouls drawn. He's only averaging 0.92 fouls drawn per 90, so not ideal stats based on that. However, if we look into the games that he's played without Kudus, we'll have to include the Carabao Cup. He drew 4 fouls against Bournemouth. Kudus didn't start. He drew 1 foul against Liverpool, 1 foul against United, 0 fouls against Forest, but 2 fouls against Everton, 2 fouls against Newcastle. From watching him in that game against Newcastle, he was a real outlet for his side alongside Mikel Antonio. And he just generally sees a lot more of the ball without Kudus. He sees a lot more responsibility for sort of dragging his side up the field. And he's a proficient dribbler, and that makes him a target for drawing fouls. Obviously, his data isn't great this season in general, but without Kudus in a good matchup against Calafiori, I like his chances. So you can actually get Calafiori foul and Bowen to be fouled, which comes out at 1.75 with Paddy Power. Obviously a little bit on the shorter side, but I do think it's a matchup to target, and this same bet is 1.57 with Sky to sort of highlight the value there. In terms of Calafiori's data, the Italian is averaging 1.67 fouls per 90 as an Arsenal player, landing a foul in 7 out of 9 games. So he's obviously quite an aggressive player still adjusting to the Premier League. So I really like that matchup. I think those two should be directly involved with each other. Again, seeing as Bowen is such a big outlet for his side, should bring Calafiori into quite heavy involvement in this game. Again, I'm going to stick with a few more leans in this one. I like those two as solid angles. But I am going to go through a couple more leans. First one being Bowen to make a tackle, and that's purely off the hit rate. It's priced at 1.3 with Bet365, but it's landed in 13 out of 15 games. So I think that's a nice price. Took advantage of that last weekend, and we get a similar price with 365. So like that. And second of all, Saliba tackles, which has been a play all season. The reason it's just a lean for now is because Gabriel was doubtful. Now, if Gabriel misses, we'll see Kirill line up alongside Saliba, and we might see the Frenchman play in the sort of more defensive role, Kirill being the aggressor, which would obviously not be ideal. So I think it's important to wait for team news there. However, I do really like his matchup against West Ham and Antonio in particular, who's sort of has a tendency to just kind of dribble into his opposition centre-back. He doesn't really... he just has a tendency to pick up the ball and just run forward kind of thing. So I do like backing sort of opposition centre-back tackles against him. But as I say, if Kirill is to be the man to engage with Antonio, more often than not, I'd probably lean towards avoiding him for now. Now, we had this situation earlier in the season. I believe it was against Atalanta, where Gabriel was doubtful, but he did end up playing. So I think if there's a chance Gabriel can play, he will play, and then this looks a good bet. Now, Bet365 are at 1.66 for that for two or more tackles, but it's normally Ladbrokes who open up much bigger than everyone else. So if we can get a price around evens, that would be ideal. So that will be all the Saturday games. Moving on to Chelsea against Villa, which is a 1:30 kickoff on Sunday at Stamford Bridge. 2-1 scoreline for Chelsea last time out at the King Power perhaps doesn't encapsulate just how dominant they were in that game. I think they're actually a very strong contender under Maresca. They are going under the radar a little bit. They do have a midweek Europa League game against Heidenheim this evening, but given that they have a sort of whole new European 11 and they are allowed to sort of rotate, I don't think there's too much information to be gained from that, potentially into just whether Malagusto is fit. So I am just going to exclude that. Aston Villa also had a midweek game against Juventus last night, which finished 0-0. Emery went with a strong side, looking to sort of continue his good form in Europe. But as it stands, Villa have been in a really poor run of form, 4 straight losses before the international break, and they've come back with back-to-back draws, one being against Palace, who have been in pretty poor form this season. And even against Juventus, I think a 0-0 draw was not a great result for them, given that Juventus had 6 players on the bench, 2 of them were goalkeepers, so they were obviously very light. They had a very light squad, they were missing some key players, and Villa couldn't really capitalise on that. Obviously, keeping a clean sheet is good against Juventus on the surface, but I think it's a game that they really should have won. In terms of the injury report, Konsa returned to the bench against Juventus, but did not feature, so could see him involved in this one. Jacob Rabzi and Amadou Onana are currently the only 2 players listed on the injury report. For Chelsea, Maresca did say that Reece James was the only player injured prior to that Leicester game, which turned out to be not entirely true, as Malagusto also missed out, which led to Fofana playing at right back. But it was sort of revealed that Gusto just missed out due to illness, so would imagine he comes back for this one. Pedro Neto was also excluded from the lineup, so there is a bit of uncertainty around those two, but if it is just to be a case of illness, you would imagine they've recovered by now. I think this game, for me, as soon as I saw the fixture, it was screaming out as being a Cole Palmer kind of game. And I'm eyeing up a few angles for him. So the first one being Cole Palmer to score or assist, which is priced at 1.73 with Paddy Power. Obviously, a little bit on the short side, but I think it's really, really good value. He's actually blanked in his last 3 games, which is why I think we get this price as backable. Usually we just don't. And it's also priced at 1.5 with Bet365, so quite a notable discrepancy there in quite a big market. Now, the reason I think it's a Cole Palmer game is because, first of all, he's fantastic at home. He sees a massive uptick in involvement. He just sees a lot more of the ball, and he's been able to generate a better output when playing at home. So if you can see 1.03 goal involvements per 90 in the Premier League this season, and that rises slightly to 1.17 when playing at home. But his 2 misses were against Man City and Arsenal, so 2 of the better defensive teams in the league. And this was City at the start of the season. So we can sort of excuse him for that. But it was a similar story for him last season. He saw a massive uptick in shots, goal involvements when playing at Stamford Bridge. And I really back him to sort of break out of his rut, or not really a rut, but his streak of not registering a goal or assist in his last 3. So if we look into the matchup, Villa have obviously failed to win each of their last 6, so it's a good time to face them. They've conceded 11 goals in that time. Clean sheet obviously last time out against Juventus, but did mention sort of injuries they had and it being an away UCL fixture for them. So I think they would be happy with a 0-0 draw in the end. Chelsea are a fully fit squad. They'll be rested midweek, or their main players will be rested midweek, back at home, so I really fancy them to cause Villa problems. They'll also be without Onana. I think he's doubtful, not completely ruled out, but he didn't even make the bench midweek, so I would imagine he sits out. If I think about his impact against teams like Liverpool and Tottenham, I thought Onana was fantastic in that game from a defensive perspective, crucial for breaking up attacks. He is that important physical presence in the heart of midfield. Obviously, Kamara is back, but I haven't really been convinced by him since he's returned from injury. I think he's lacked that sort of physical aspect that he had when he played alongside Douglas Luiz. And I think if Onana was at his disposal, Emery would have no doubts in choosing him over Kamara for this one. So with that in mind, I think Villa are in a position where they're set to struggle to deal with Cole Palmer, and therefore I like his prospects. As I said, it's a nice buy low spot for him, given that he's blanked in each of his last 3. So it's always good to get this sort of, play at backable. This is one of my favourite bets again for the weekend, I would say. You can also grab 3 shots, 1 on target for Cole Palmer at 1.7, which again is a bit short, but it's good value in my opinion. Now the next set of bets are in regards to Chelsea making tackles. Now I think all 3 are a bit undervalued here. The first one is Malo Gusto, who is priced at even money to make 2 or more tackles with Bet365. And just on the surface, I think that looks a pretty unusual line for a fullback, especially in quite a big game. It's landed in 5 out of 9 this season. He's averaging 2.34 tackles per 90. So obviously averages are above the line, which is ideal. And he draws a good matchup here against likely Morgan Rogers, I would say. I think Villa go for a similar lineup to that which started against Juventus at home. And that saw Morgan Rogers on the right, on the left wing. So that would see him directly up against Malo Gusto, which would be ideal. So that's the first one. Next one is Caicedo to make 3 or more tackles, which is priced at 1.66. Once again, a little bit on the shorter side, but it's landed in 9 out of 12 games this season, including 9 of the last 10 in the league. So he's averaging 3.49 tackles per 90, highest in the Chelsea squad. And we'll have to deal with the likes of John McGinn, Leon Bailey, Ollie Watkins, and Morgan Rogers. So again, draws a good matchup. Data looks good. So I can't really understand why he's almost backable for 3 or more tackles given the hit rates. And finally, what I believe to be the best value is Madueke for 1 or more tackle, which is 1.44. Obviously, that would have to be doubled with something, but he's averaging 1.38 tackles per 90, landing the selection in 9 out of 11 games this season. And he sees a notable uptick when playing at home. So obviously, he doesn't finish the 90 very often, but he's landed at least 1 tackle in all 5 games in the league. And he's averaging 2.17 tackles per 90 and 1.8 per game. So Again, data looks good. Matchup is good, I would say. He'll be on the same side as Morgan Rogers. So those three players I want to target, I would say, for tackles. Fafana might be right back again. Yeah, so thanks for that, Dylan. I think there's a chance, but as I said, he missed out due to illness, I believe, on the weekend. So he's had a fairly long time to recover. Probably best to wait for the lineups against Heidenheim if he's on the bench. I would imagine he starts on the weekend. But yeah, that will conclude that game. The next one to cover is Man United against Everton. I believe this is a non-televised game actually, but it's a 1:30 kickoff on Sunday. Man United against Ipswich finished 1-1 in Amorim's first game. I thought the performance was overall a little bit underwhelming. Ipswich were probably the better team. If you think about if Liam Delap had converted his two massive chances, it would have been completely different, and I would say Ipswich go on to win it. It wasn't quite the sort of high-octane, high-pressing style that we expected from Amorim, but it's worth noting that that was obviously his first game in charge, and I can only imagine it takes some time for him to implement such radical changes. They do have a midweek game against Bodo Glimt, I believe, this evening, which will be the second game for Amorim, so obviously plenty of information to be gained from that, especially in terms of predicted lineups. But what I am going to do for this in this stream is just sort of look at how we lined up against Ipswich and what we can take away from that. For Everton, they somehow failed to score against Brentford last time out, who had Norgard sent off in the first half. His red card has actually been rescinded, so he won't be suspended for any games. Toby's had 27 shots, 10 corners, but that amounted to just 1.2 xg. And considering that the visitors had just 9 shots amounting to 1.1 xg, it's obviously not a great sign. They weren't clearly, like, they didn't deserve much more than the point they got in the end. So not a good sign for them. It's worth noting as well that Everton have had quite an easy fixture run so far, but they've won just 2 games in 12. So in their next 6, they play Liverpool, Arsenal, Wolves, Man United, Chelsea, and Man City. So it's set to be a very, very tough run for them going forward. In terms of the injury report, for Man United, we saw Luke Shaw return against Ipswich. Lissandro Martinez didn't feature in that game, but he is set for an imminent return. For Everton, they have no new injury concerns, so I would expect them to go unchanged from their previous outing. Again, markets will be limited for this one, given that it's non-televised. And I'm still not fully accustomed or set with the Man United system, so a lot of these bets will just be leans. The first one that I have in mind, though, is for Young to commit a foul, given that he'll be up against Garnacho in this game. So he's committed a foul in 8 out of 10 starts this season, playing as the right back with sort of Coleman and Patterson out. Garnacho is drawing 1.31 fouls per 90, so quite a notable number. And the last time he faced Garnacho, actually, Young massively struggled. He had 3 fouls, 0 tackles. He conceded a penalty and was booked. So it's a bit of a mismatch on the left wing. I think those two should find plenty of duels against each other. And Young is 1.4 for a foul with Sky, so he's their top price. And I do like that price actually. Obviously, it would have to be doubled with something, potentially Garnacho fouls drawn, but that is one to keep an eye on as being good value. Against Ipswich, the bet I took was Bruno to score or assist. Would I take that one again? Probably not. He had his chances in the sense that he created a big chance for Garnacho. He had a couple of close calls with shots, but ultimately his best, or the closest he went, was from a free kick. And what sort of worries me most about that selection was the fact that when Eriksen went off, Bruno dropped into that sort of deeper midfield role, which is obviously not ideal for his goal scoring prospects. It probably helped his expected assists, but definitely not his goal scoring prospects. So that's something to keep an eye on. It's also worth noting that Casemiro started the game instead of Ugarte, and was replaced by the Portuguese man after 55 minutes. So I would imagine Amorim sort of uses those two, Casemiro and Ugarte, interchangeably, which is not ideal because it means neither are guaranteed minutes, and it just doesn't make their prospects as good as if they were to start. If one of them was to be injured, other one would be a good target, but as of now, I'd probably be a bit wary targeting those two. Something to potentially pair the young foul with would be Amad Diallo tackles. Now, he blanked against Ipswich, which was a bit interesting actually, but he does draw a much better matchup here against Iliman Ndiaye on the wing for Everton. Diallo is averaging 2.35 tackles per 90 for United this season, with 2 or more tackles landing in 5 out of 10. Obviously, the data there is nothing sort of spectacular, but it's obviously worth noting that he was in a more defensive role as a wing-back in Amorim's first game. And if he is to do that again, you just imagine that his defensive output will only increase. 2.35 tackles per 90. Landed two more tackles in 5 out of 10 in a more defensive role in a good matchup against Iliman Ndiaye. So I think he is one to target, potentially doubling with Young. But as I say, I haven't really got any concrete angles for this game. I think it's a tough one to call, especially with the new system. And I'm just not fully set into it yet. So that'll be it for that game. Moving on to the final and biggest game of the weekend is Liverpool against Man City, which is a 4 p.m. kickoff on Sunday. So it's first versus second in the league. Man City obviously sit 8 points off their rivals, but Liverpool were able to extend that gap by beating Southampton at St Mary's on the weekend. It wasn't quite the sort of regulation victory that most would have expected or anticipated, but Salah was the standout performer in that game. He scored 2 goals, hit the post late on, and he just looked generally really, really fired up for the game. Midweek, he was less impressive. He obviously missed a penalty, but he won't care because Liverpool were dominant once again, registering a 2-0 win against Real Madrid, going for quite a strong side. That game was quite a high intensity game. It was very end to end, a lot of running. Just wonder whether that would have any impact on Liverpool this weekend. Pep Guardiola, however, is into sort of unexplored territory, uncharted territory with a horrible run of form. 5 straight losses, followed by the draw to Feyenoord at home. But that game was more than just a draw. City were obviously 3-0 up after 74 minutes. So to draw 3-3 is pretty incredible. Actually, it's kind of unheard of for a Guardiola side to capitulate like that. So it's been more than just a poor run of form. It's been a disastrous period for them, really. And we're into sort of something that we haven't experienced yet. And because of that, I wouldn't be surprised to see radical changes from Guardiola. I just think it's a really, really tough game to predict, especially if Guardiola is to make big changes. In terms of the injury report, Trent is obviously back in training and was on the bench against Madrid, which is important because he will likely start this game with Bradley taken off towards the end of that Madrid game with an apparent hamstring injury. Tsimikas is also out, which should work to benefit Robertson, should increase his expected minutes. Alisson and Jota are still out, but Kanate is a potential big one because he was injured in what was the last play of the game against Madrid, and he is set to be assessed ahead of this one. So if he does miss, that would be big news, but would likely give Kwanzaa an opportunity in a big game. For Man City, De Bruyne is still yet to start since returning from his injury. Other than that, they haven't really got anyone else out. It's just players returning. But I don't really want to give a team sheet prediction for City. I just think we could get some changes, some quite big changes. But that is just something to keep an eye on, sort of as more information is released. So I think with this game, there's lots of potential angles. I will be confirming them sort of closer to the kickoff time, which I'll have a thread going out doing that. So again, if you're not following me on Twitter, make sure you are, just to stay in the loop with all the bets that I post. Ben Gray, Bernardo fouls increasing massively. Yeah, and cards too. Yeah, so I'm actually going to cover Bernardo Silva in this game. So I'll come back to that comment in a second. The first potential angle I have for this game is for Haaland to register 2 or more shots. Obviously, something familiar over the last couple of weeks. I'm not actually as set on it this time as I usually am. I'm probably leaning towards more ignoring it actually, just based on how effectively Liverpool dealt with Mbappe. He had absolutely nothing to go off, and I think that's more credit to Liverpool than sort of Mbappe had a stinker. Obviously he missed the penalty, but from open play, just had absolutely nothing in that game. However, obviously as I mentioned, Konate might miss this game, which is another big variable to consider, because I think if Haaland can sort of stick with Kwanzaa, he has a lot better chance of sort of increasing his attacking output than if he is against Konate. So again, one to keep an eye on. But Haaland is plus money for 2 or more shots on target, which is so rare. Next bet I have is, I quite like this one actually, it's for McAllister to have 1 or more shots. I think there's potential to ladder this one actually. He's top price with Bet365 and Unibet at 1.72. He's averaging 1.03 shots per 90 under Arnie's slot, so obviously nothing particularly revolutionary there in the data. But that rises to 1.28 when playing at Anfield. And he's landed this bet in 6 out of 8 starts this season. And we generally tend to see an uptick in more difficult games. So we had 2 most recently against Madrid. He had 2 against Leverkusen in Champions League. And he was memorably fantastic in this head-to-head last season against City. He had 4 shots in that game. He scored, but it was from the penalty spot. So I doubt he sort of takes another penalty if they are to be awarded one with Salah available. Although it's worth noting that Salah did obviously miss against Madrid. But as I say, 4 shots in that game, 3 from open play. He was always available at the edge of the box. And that becomes important in this game where sort of clear-cut chances are likely to be more scarce. So 1.72 for him to have at least one shot, I think is a pretty nice price. Next one will be the one Ben Gray mentioned. It will be for Bernardo Silva, fouls and tackles. He generally is just a player to target against Liverpool. Doesn't seem to have much respect for them, and that's reflected in his foul counts and his tackle counts. So last season, Bernardo Silva had 2 fouls in respective games against Liverpool, and he was booked in both. Across his career, he's made a foul in 8 out of 10 against the Reds, averaging 1.38 fouls per 90, which is quite a significant uptick on his averages in general. He's priced at 1.61 with Bet365 to commit 1 foul or more, which I think looks massive just based on that. But I think the real value actually for this is, or slightly better value, is in his tackle markets. So he obviously is right at the top for tackles in this head-to-head. He's made at least 2 tackles in 9 out of 10 head-to-head games against Liverpool. And he's priced at 2.1 to repeat that. So that looks pretty big on the surface, especially considering that it landed in both head-to-head games last season, which he started. And he had 2 fouls in those, and he was booked, which obviously would hinder his tackle chances. So I do think he is a player to target. I would say the tackle line is probably slightly better value than his foul line. But as you say, he does generally see an uptick in bigger games, especially against Liverpool. So there is a lot of potential for both. It's always difficult to choose between one or the other, because you think if he is to get an early card, that would sort of massively affect his tackle chances. So that is something again to consider. But I am at the moment leaning towards tackles as opposed to fouls. The next person that stands out is obviously slightly below Bernardo Silva, Rodri. His tackle numbers are also notable in this fixture, averaging 2.56 per 90. Obviously he won't play, but who do we think will start in that same sort of defensive midfield role? Against Sporting, it was Mateus Nunes. And in that game, he made 5 tackles and 2 fouls, 11 ground duels, which is notably high. And I think if he is to start in a similar role, 1.72 for 2 or more tackles looks a real good shout. He played the full 90 against Sporting, and he generally just has seen a bit more responsibility recently for Pep Guardiola in this sort of bad run of form. But yeah, I think defensive midfielder against Liverpool should see plenty of defensive work. I'm not sure what Paddy have his foul price at, but he's generally been opening around even money by 1.9, so that could be one to keep an eye on as well. And finally, my target player will be Kyle Walker, who was really kept on his toes last time in this matchup against Liverpool, as he made 3 tackles and 2 fouls against Luis Diaz. He was also dribbled past 3 times, so heavily involved in that game. And I think Arne Slot will sort of look to target that matchup. I think Walker obviously has ridiculous recovery pace, but he's not the most adept player defensively. And I think Arne Slot will recognise that and look to target him. He's priced at 1.61 to make 2 or more tackles with Sky. Obviously a bit on the short side, but I just think the matchup is really good, and could pair that with something, for example, a Luis Diaz foul, Luis Diaz to draw a foul, something along those lines. But that is 4 potential early angles for the biggest match of the weekend, and that will conclude all the games covered for this stream. Thank you for your support, thank you for leaving your comments, and thank you for your interactions. Remember to stay tuned on Twitter, remember to stay tuned on Telegram. All my bets will be posted on Telegram. I made a slight change over the last 2 weeks or so, where I've been posting a bit more volume on Telegram as opposed to Twitter, so make sure you are in the channel. But I'll be, as I say, confirming a lot of these bets on Twitter with research threads, so make sure you're in the loop there with notifications on. But thank you very much for tuning in, thank you for your comments, thank you for your support, and best of luck for any bets, and I will see you next Thursday. So take care and have a great day.